I Do by Freedom Berry. Part 2. The procedure is now. The dream. Life is real. Life is earnest. Life is but an empty dream. Longfellow. Every individual enters this world and at once begins to observe appearances. Sad indeed it is in the multitudes make their exits from it without having plumbed any deeper than mere observation. To them the observed is the actual and the only life, the beginning and the end of all things. A few sooner or later begin to search for a meaning to life. Has it a purpose? Is it only a dream? Even a dream must have a dreamer, and this sudden recognition initiates a change in the direction of the search. A thought must have a thinker. If it is my perception, then surely something in me has perceived it. Granted that I am the thinker and the dreamer, what can make a clear distinction for me between my thinking and my dreaming? In my physical sleep I dream, and in that dreaming I seem to myself to be awake, moving about among the properties of the dream. Could it be possible that when I term thinking while awake is to a higher degree of awakening, still only a dreaming? The being, abandoned to the drama, is producing the dream that the drama of life is real, life is earnest. But the entire content of life, as far as the drama goes, is but an empty dream. The dream is empty unless it has a dreamer, and to the one who does not know he is dreaming, life must seem empty indeed, totally without meaning. The dream always implies that anything of a visibly solid nature is the total reality of it. The perceptions made visible by the focus of one's attention are not the substance of life, but the semblance. Actual substance consists not, as pointed out earlier, in dimensionally visible objects, but in the invisible conceivability of concepts. As long as the dream persists, however, its situations remain to the dreamer the realities of life. No one is expected to believe from his position within the dream that the situations of life as observed are only a dream. The dreamer cherishes the supposed reality of all the issues of life which are so very apparent to him. After all, many of these issues are sweet to the taste. If there are any discouragements, there are also rewards that should not be discounted. Certainly there are tragedies, but there are also many redeeming features, such as friendship, marriage, parenthood, public service, and even fame. Now we are getting close to the heart of the matter. From within the greater dream of living, the person of average development is secure in his limited sense of individuality. Here he is one of the many, and through much toil and some sacrifice, he may be seen to excel, or at any rate to maintain the respect and approval of those to him constitute the many. Almost everyone is reluctant, when faced with an enlarged presentation of individuality, to investigate its possibilities, because it challenges the survival of what he at present calls identity. Ultimately, each must admit that the many have identity for him, as the many only through this awareness of them. If you were not aware of a multitude of rocks, could those rocks have existence for you? Even though you may admit they would not, you quickly insist that they still would have existence for someone else. But follow the chain of logic to its last link. Suppose that, one by one, each should die or cease to be aware of a multitude of rocks, until not one identifying unit remained. To what then would you prove, indeed how could you prove, that anything, even a rock, had identity apart from one's perception of it? Those who constitute what you call many people are no more external and independent from your perception of them than many rocks. All have identity for you by the same process that you have identity for anyone, by your or that one's identification of them. This line of logic greatly disturbs the dreamer. Almost everybody feels more comfortable in his sleeping than in facing the responsibilities imposed by being awake. The fear that his identity is being wrested from him and is being absorbed into some invisible vacuum causes him to cling rapidly to whatever is visible to him as that identity. Such persistence in physical separateness as one's identity is the root of that one's loneliness. Your being, as revealed in the first chapter of this book, is invisible anyway. For man shall not see me and live. No one can discover his invisible reality as I am and live again completely within his previous limited concept of himself as one physical, mental being among billions of other physical, mental beings, either under the central control of, or else banished from the presence of, one unknowable superbeing. Only the sleeper of the profoundest sleep could continue dreaming that the dream is the actual living, and irreverently ignore the Supreme Creator's presence where it openly pronounces it to be, in your I am. I know all the birds of the air, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and all that is in it is mine. Psalm 50:11 and 12. This is not the boasting of some autocratic dictator, twitting you with the arrogant reminder that he has it all, and that you should content yourself with a little or nothing. His pleasure or displeasure in your performance may permit. This is the urgent appeal of the visionary who had discovered his presence to be his own imagination. This is the call directed to every man to acknowledge that all apparent object things have existence for him only through his perception of them. Why would I appeal to another for anything when that one to whom I would appeal has identity for me only through my awareness of him? If his existence for me depends entirely upon my conscious admission of it, what could I possibly expect from him in the way of actual assistance? I will lift up mine eyes to the hill from whence cometh my help. Psalm 121:1. These hills are the higher intensity levels within the self of me. I question with Blake, why stand we around calling on God for help, and not ourselves in whom God dwells? The nature of the dream is such that the dreamer finds himself chained to it by his complete fascination with its contents. The case I am presenting urges that these contents have reality not in and of themselves, but only through the dreamer's consenting to dream them. When he wakes, he who has dreamed the dream discovers that his being had, for the duration of his dreaming, invested its reality into the eternally imaginable contents of the drama, thereby projecting the visible semblance of those invisible but substantial conceivabilities. As long as the being remains asleep in the drama that he is you awake, slight progress can be expected in effecting any degree of spiritual awakening. But we need not despair. The divine imagining knew the profundity of the sleep out of which it would have to awaken, knew it all before it abandoned itself in decreasing intensity to become the activator of that sleep. And even though from within the dream it seems that the character, in whom God dwells, is stubbornly resisting the awakening, we can take heart from St. Paul's long letter of encouragement to the Corinthians. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed, for this perishable nature must put on the imperishable. 1 Corinthians 15:51-53. The imperishable being put on the perishable nature, and even though that nature, in its dream of independent selfhood, clings to its perishability, it is the divine being itself that is awakening, and cannot fail to be what it is. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Revelations 22:13. I am is the life even of death. Are not all visible appearances by nature perishable? Blake seems to be saying that for us in his warning. The oak dies as well as the lettuce, but its eternal image and individuality never dies. These bodies that are temporal, interpretation of God's dwelling place, do they not all, strong or weak, die, as well as the lettuce? God is his own dwelling place. However long you may have believed that you are merely life's habitation, I insist that the awareness of being is life, and that this life is your life. This insistence is based upon my own spiritual experience. The discovery. One afternoon in late September 1960, while I was walking east on Post Street in busy downtown San Francisco, I entertained the most unique experience in my spiritual development. Quite suddenly I became aware that I was not my body, although I most assuredly was its life. To my illumined sense, my being was totally invisible, although I was far more real than I had ever felt myself to be up to that moment. Not only was I invisible and real, but that invisible reality was the actual substance of all that I beheld, and I was beholding the same objects that had become familiar to me from living in that exciting city. To my apprehension, I was the Bay Bridge. I was the Bohemian Club. I was the pebble I sensed so keenly under my foot. I was the traffic signal at the corner. I was even the newspaper vendor. Everything I was seeing was just as I'd always seen it, except that in its experience, no object or person even seemed to have existence independently of my perception of its being. To my invisible reality, the perception and I, the perceiver, were one and the same substance. My physical body, so insignificant a portion of this beholding and beheld, was the merest apron, or inadequate surface shield, to the being which I at that moment discovered myself to be. It appeared to me so very drawn and perplexed that I laughed. The face did not laugh, but I laughed, and never in my recollection of living have I felt the joy of laughter so deeply. When I stepped on a sharp pebble on the sidewalk, although my physical foot was literally on the pebble, I was the being who sensed it, the foot was not. The sound of a honking horn registered, not in my physical ear, but in me. And the clarity of that relatively small and ordinary sound was so intense that I felt later upon recalling it. All my hearing up to that moment must have been so fractional as to be almost negligible. Yet I have, by accepted physical standards, an exceptionally keen auditory sense. Every person I beheld derived this capacity to move from my being, for I was his very walking. St. Paul's word, "In him we live and move and have our being," Acts 17:28, had just then become a personal experience, and from within it I could feel only that, in me they live and move and have their being. The conclusion to which this experience impelled me were not immediately formed, but radical changes in my habitual attitudes were at once noticeable. I maintained a consistent serenity without the least conscious effort for several days, and confidence and dominion became the norm. For 20 years I had accepted theoretically a revelation which this moment of spiritual experience illuminated for me with absolute certainty. I had heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye hath seen thee. Job 42:5. I had accepted a revelation of spiritual principle characterized by divinely logical reasoning, and my dedicated efforts to practice that revelation had rewarded me unnumbered times with signs following. Even so, I could never assert with the authority I now ken that my awareness of being is God the Father, the sole cause which produces and sustains whatever has identity for me. This one experience of actually being the life and substance of all I beheld spontaneously compelled me to sing aloud the Gloria Patri, which prefaces the body of this book. The Father I had long accepted as cause, and the Son I had just as long accepted as effect. But in this experience I had discovered the Holy Ghost. The discovery is the Holy Ghost, that conscious communion between cause and its effect, establishing the rapport of inseparability. Wherefore there are no more twain but one flesh. Matthew 19:6. If the being is Alpha and Omega, if it is the beginning and the end, the cause and the effect, then it is Father and Son. And this discovery that the same being is all that appears to go between the first and the last is the Holy Ghost. However convincing I might have attempted to present the preceding sentence as irrefutable logic, my effort would have been inept by the standard of my personal experience of it. Now the accuracy of spiritual vision is not for me a matter of debate. Whether or not the events recorded in Scripture have also an historical witness, I know the intent is to present the eternal contents of the drama of life. Because these contents endure in spiritual vision, they may be experienced by all. Sooner or later, I cannot help feeling every individual will experience the same discovery that I did, although the details of his experience will necessarily unfold in him in the language of his own acceptance. My discovery, although clothed in a situation natural to me, is in content identical to St. Paul's discovery, elucidated in his letters to the Galatians. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. Galatians 2:20. The living that appears to the individual to be so personal, so separate and private, is the Creator's living, the Word made flesh. Christ is the living presence of creativity and implies more of a function than a name. It is the ideal of fulfillment for every individual. Old Testament symbology depicts eternity as the Garden of Eden, containing every conceivable possibility. Out of this garden flows a stream of consciousness which irrigates and causes life to spring up whatever its flow reaches. Running through the vision of the prophet Ezekiel, like a recurrent theme in symphonic structure, is the motif of livingness imparted by the river. At each ascending step of the prophet's enlarged vision, we have the repeated question, Son of man, hast thou seen this? Then the being brings its strained attention back to the thread that has ever been woven into the fabric of further discovery. Then he brought me back to the door of the temple, Ezekiel 47:1. Then he brought me out by way of the north gate, Ezekiel 47:2. Then he led me back along the bank of the river, Ezekiel 47:7. The wondrous discovery, after all this discipline of directing one's attention back to, out from, and back again to its source is, and when it enters the stagnant waters of the sea, the water will become fresh, and wherever the river goes, every living creature with swarms will live, so everything will live where the river goes. Ezekiel 47:8-9. Your awareness of being, spearheaded to a focal point, is the river that causes any or every imaginable possibility to live as a condition in your environment. Your own deep spiritual conviction of actually being an ideal is the only pulsation of lifeblood that your ideal can ever have for you. If you would become it, you must begin to be it. My discovery settled many concepts into place for me in the overall spiritual design. For a long time, I had been mentally sorting data, propounded by different schools of religious and philosophical thought. Weighing some ideas uneasily against others, I had agreed with myself to accept on temporary consignment, so to speak. My greatest exultation came from the inexorable evidence that the concept of individuality I had campaigned for so long was confirmed by the experience. The first dictionary definition of individual as indivisible had now been proven true in relation to one divine being, which is the substance of all visible objects, even people. At the same time, the being is not divided into particulars to compromise separate appearance. In the experience, I was the being that constituted all phenomena. Above all, the experience left me with the irrevocable conviction that the summation of Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream is literally and eternally true. Your kingdom shall be sure for you from the time that you know that heaven rules. Daniel 4:26. The experience of being heaven, as well as all it includes, produces a conviction of security that even amid challenging circumstances remains inviolably vital. The technique, resurrection. Continue thou in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them. 2 Timothy 3:14. The precise technical exercises which I shall recommend for the development of facility in metaphysical practice have been set forth lucidly in the books of one called Neville, whose personal mystical experiences in the depth of spirit have rendered his acquaintance with that realm as intimate for him as in the most commonly accepted appearance for most of us. My gratitude to Neville is immeasurable, for it was he who wisely encouraged me to conduct my own spiritual investigation and to speak only the conclusions of my personal experience would yield. My purpose in urging the use of this technique is to indicate a far-reaching result than merely to witness the evolution of a conceivable desire as it becomes an environmental condition. Beyond the projection of a possibility into time-space appearance, the indulgence in these exercises by the individual effects in him the personal fulfillment of the second of the three greatest Christian mysteries, the resurrection. No one can exercise the experiencing faculty without expanding its capacity. The stone of ineptitude is rolled away from the sepulchre of spiritual inactivity only through the individual's consistent discipline. The weakness of the one who repeatedly demands external aid in solving his problems always matures into a stronger weakness, and that one progressively finds himself even more deeply entombed in his prison of helplessness every time he leans on another's efforts. One by one we find ourselves at the point of individual discovery, immersed in a dream. The illumination which our discovery produces in us begins germinating in a desire to extricate ourselves from the sleepwalking to do what our conformity to the dream has accustomed us to do. But our intention to act decisively soon reveals our feebleness in attempting to adroitly maneuver this tremendous force. Imagination, because it has no external limits, has freely roamed with nothing to constrain its wanderings. If it is to have any direction whatever, that direction must be initiated and disciplined from within. It is in the interest of charting a purposeful course that systems were devised. The pity is that when a mystic visionary provides a set of rules as a temporary aid to the individual in steadying his course, some kind of ecclesiastic group inevitably forges from these rules an iron doctrine to which it then seeks to bend the obedience of a body of unawakened and therefore willing subscribers. Blake clearly exposed his pattern of behavior as one of the eternally conceivable states. In A Vision of the Last Judgment, he writes, I do not consider either the just or the wicked to be in a supreme state, but to be every one of them states of the sleep of which the soul may fall into in its deadly dreams of good and evil, when it leaves paradise following the serpent. Following the dictates of another's ideas must always conclude in a show of tyranny. Here is a quotation from Jerusalem which indicates that Blake had recognized the necessity of acting only from his own spiritual vision and devising his own rules for guidance. I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason and compare. My business is to create. As an example, no successful concert pianist would expect to use today the same set of technique exercises that was necessary for him in the beginning. At the start, he required those exercises designed to provide him with independence of fingers, flexible wrists, and even touch and so forth. As his technique developed, the demand was for precision of attack, delineation of phrase, shaping of nuances, and so on. The set of rules had always to be adapted to the individual need. In the prodigious operation of resurrecting the being from its dream, no fixed set of rules can be thought to suffice for every encounter. Or to put it another way, one should not attempt to solve cube root problems with the rules governing simple fractions. The individual should draw on his resourcefulness to expand the exercise, which will facilitate his deliverance to an even greater need, and continue in this way ad infinitum. In 7 steps, I would outline the general fundamentals for successful development of spiritual prowess and the production of a desirable environmental change. Step 1. Remind yourself that your imagination is the being, the power, against which the most bombastic threat of force is of no moment whatever. 2. Select from the inexhaustible alphabet of conceivable possibilities the ideal you would like to embody. 3. Devise a situation which implies that your selection is already a visible condition. 4. Imagine yourself as detached from identification with your present environment. 5. Abandon yourself to actualizing your selected situation. 6. Feel the emotional release that would accompany your experiencing of your ideal in the flesh. 7. Intensify and persist in your feeling of actually being this ideal in your outward, visible expression. Let me here emphasize that this activity is not a mere picturing process of the mind. Results depend upon whether or not the individual succeeds in deepening his mental concept sufficiently to achieve a conviction. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. John 4:24. Worship in the depth of spirit is not accomplished by visualizing mental concepts. Whatever visualizing is permissible in this process of awakening is found in the 3rd step of the outline suggested above. There is nothing of a creative or productive nature in just visualizing. That aspect is purely mechanical one, the assemblage before the man's eye from the alphabet of imaginable situations, of a scene that implies fulfillment. Visualizing is only the setting of the stage. Nothing but the actual performance of the scene can establish the conviction. There is a startling and cognate scriptural authority for the use of this technique disclosed in the Gospel according to Matthew. I understand Jesus of Nazareth to be the Word made flesh, the spiritual seer's prototype of the embodiment of creativity. We have already discovered the creative being to be imagination. So in this light, contemplate the deeper meaning of what, on the surface, gives the impression of being merely a simple answer to a simple question. Then the disciples came and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" And he answered them, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to him who has will more be given, and he will have more abundance, but from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables." Matthew 13:10-13. A parable is a little drama with an implied meaning. The finely disciplined attributes of imagination can immediately assume a feeling that a desire is already fulfilled, but the undisciplined attributes do not respond quite so readily. Therefore, imagination enacts the final segment of a situation that implies fulfillment, and in performing that scene embodies the feeling of the fulfillment. The impersonal fashion in which the law of cause and effect operates shows the necessity of changing the feeling of not having or not being to the acute feeling of having or being. For to him who has, or the conviction of having, will it be given, and he will have abundance, but from him who has not, that conviction of having, even what he has will be taken away. One's feeling is outwardly multiplied in identical appearances. Who but you is capable of feeling in your deepest awareness that a particular situation is so or not? Anyone could feel that a thing is true of you, but no one aside from yourself could feel it in you. The necessity of exercising your own faculties is abundantly clear, if you would experience the awakening of spirit. This is the present necessity and urgency which is now upon you. You do not roll away the stone of ignorance in your study of arithmetic by engaging another to solve the problems posed in the examples of the textbook offered. The actual indulgence of your faculties in the principle involved eventually made clear, through repeated adaptation, the direction to take each time. Take this technique and apply it to making the crooked places straight. Whenever a thought impinges on your attention, which causes you a sensation that falls short of satisfaction, devise a new meaning for that thought, one that generally satisfies, and specifically apply it to the 7 steps of the outline. If you continue using this method, all the while expanding the technique from those suggested above to fit the conditions at hand, there will come the moment when you will hear a voice from your own depth say, with unquestioned authority, "This is the way, walk ye in it." Isaiah 30:21. And you will surely know it refers not only to the direct process of producing results in your environment, but also the far broader reward of effecting your redemption from the dream. The untold want, by life and land mere granted, now voyagers sail thou forth to seek and find. Walt Whitman. End of Part 2.